Well, hello. Welcome to episode 13. That went fast. Of course, I'm your mostly friendly host, Ziggy Salvation. And we're going to continue our little conversation about our buddy Thrall. Now, if you guys remember last week, we were kind of talking about how Rexar had come into the fold and declined being part of, Machnathal, being part of the Horde and whatnot, over during the whole founding of Orgrimmar, right? So that brings us into this lordship, when Thrall was warned by Kelthar, who was a shaman, about this strange anomaly over the Kalimdor Mountains. Thrall sent Broxigar and Gaskell to investigate it, right? The anomaly pulled Brox, Gaskell, Krasus, and Ronan into the past about 10,000 years ago. And through Gaskell's kind of died during transporting, then Broxigar died in the conclusion of the War of the Ancients. His famous axe that was made by Cenarius was received and delivered to Thrall by Kraelstras to honor the brave Broxigar. 3 years passed by, okay? And Orgrimmar was kind of getting swollen. It's just getting a lot bigger, a lot faster than imagined. And a series of these minor incidents between the Durotar Orcs and the Theramore humans kind of threatened the stability of the entire area. Now, Thrall and Jaina kind of were really trying to attempt to keep their peace because they'd given each other their word. But the Horde grew out of Thrall's control when the chief warrior Burks took an army of orcs and trolls to the Northwatch Hold. The same keep that Proudmoore used for his his operations. When they got there, they kind of demanded, that it was dismantled. That the humans were to dismantle their own keep. Well, of course they didn't. So after the battle, Jaina contacted Thrall with this information that his Burks was working for the Orcish end of the Burning Blade cult. And for anyone who's, everyone who's been playing the game, the Burning Blade is right outside of Orgrimmar. Those are the guys in the purple dresses that you see. You kill them for the sigils, right? So it was then that, Thrall kind of got really heated about the whole thing. Especially that the idea of an orc would once again serve the Legion. And there was, what was the demon's name? Zamadlor, I think it was. I think it was Zamadlor that was pulling strings within the Burning Blade cult. So Thrall immediately stopped the battle with some impressive, aid from the spirits, naturally, because he's the shaman now, and he denounced Burks completely as an orc and part of the Horde. When the warrior protested that he was, acting within the Horde's best interests, Thrall. Now this is back when Thrall was kind of still a badass, right? He took Doomhammer and just smashed his skull. Game over. The end. Insurrection. See ya. Those events kind of prompted Jaina and Thrall to pursue a more official, Horde alliance treaty. Despite the rise of the tensions in the last, say year or so, the actions themselves kind of came to a stop. Even though not completely, broken, but there was like this cycle of bitter hatred. And that kind of brings us up to the World of Warcraft timeline, where Thrall was the proud warchief of the Horde, and he kind of remained in his place. Located right in the Valley of Wisdom in Orgrimmar, he was also considered the mightiest orc alive at the time. He stood as warchief over the entirety of the Horde, holding dominion over the Darkspear trolls, then the Tauren tribes. His honor was cunning and compassion kind of won over a lot of allies over the years, even among the humans and the Night Elves. Thrall lives to defend his people's freedom and ensure the safety of their, the extended Horde. that's one of the things that's always kind of stood out for me. Everyone references him as Green Jesus, and this, he's a chosen one, this and that. But the character himself is a good leader. Then you had the members of the Shattered Hand. They kind of remained in Azeroth, and they became this integral part of Thrall's new horde. With their foundation being in Durotar, the horde capital of being, obviously being Orgrimmar, the Shattered Hand had become the horde's clan of assassins, training their new rogues in the service of the Warchief. However, as is with all rogues, the extent of their loyalty is kind of unknown. And one of their members, Zendazan, states that he had foreseen the death of Thrall, but whether this is just a premonition he had of the Warchief's demise, or that he had, the Shattered Hand in Orgrimmar plans to kill Thrall, still remains a mystery to this day. No one knows still what he meant. However, right next to the Wretched, which is Zendazan's contact, kind of points out that he's not quite sane, and that his words are perhaps, should not be taken so seriously. Despite, the defeat of the Burning Legion, and then the Elder Proudmoore, the Warchief's life was still far from dull. Threats to Durotar from outside and within the force, they kind of force him to remain ever vigilant. At some point, though, Thrall receives Sylvanas', at the time she was just the Forsaken Ambassador, demanded to join the Horde. And Thrall wasn't sure about them, but with the support of, Hamul Rune Totem, which we meet in the Barrens right at the crossroads there, Thrall was convinced to accept them. Thus, the Horde gained access to Lordaeron, which was considerably substantial. The Reventusk tribe learned that, about the new Horde and sent runners to Thrall. Thrall was wary of the trolls at first, but then he came to see that the Reventusk trolls were kind of unique amongst forest trolls in a fundamental way. That being, the Reventusk decided to kind of specialize in the trickster art of, negotiation. By the time they spoke with Thrall, Reventusk had acquired a reputation for trustworthiness, and it was kind of well deserved. The trolls were impressed by Thrall and his overall dream. And even so, they kind of remember that the recklessness and the corruption of the first Horde. Thus, Reventusk kind of declined to join the Horde, but they did agree to pacts of friendship and mutual assistance. So they sit there in Reventusk village at the bottom of the hinterlands. They'll give you quests, they'll let you do their thing, but they're never really a part of the Horde, And at that time of his tenure, Nazgrel and Eitrig were both Thrall's advisors. Thrall tasked Eitrig to oversee the new Horde recruits. He watched growing danger within the caves of Orgrimmar and worked with the young Horde members who had sent a spy to Niru Fireblade. Thrall learned that the leader of the Burning Blade had worked with the Searing Blade under Orgrimmar, and eventually Thrall sent the adventurers beneath Orgrimmar to deal with the Searing Blade leaders. We know this place as Ragefire Chasm. He also sent the Orc Goldir and his 3 companions to Hillsbrad to deal with the Syndicate problem. During the process, they were kidnapped, later rescued, but eventually killed the Syndicate leader, Aladin Paranold, which is where you get Tirith's necklace. And it was also required by Aladin's mistress, was it Lisa, I think, who was eventually delivered to Thrall. Eventually, at some point, Thrall sent Kargath, the expeditionary force, to the Badlands in order to explore this new land, and the commander Gorshak was sent to Blackrock Depths. While there, allowed himself to be captured by the Dark Iron Dwarves in order to gather this intelligence. Gorshak learned that Princess Moira Bronzebeard had been captured. Though Thrall sought out to strike, he sent a strike team to liberate her in order to kind of strengthen the relations with the Eastern Kingdoms, ultimately it was the Alliance's force that kind of entered Blackrock Depths and killed Thalrusi, the Emperor of the Dark Iron Dwarves. And despite the political quarreling between the Horde and the Alliance, Thrall kind of always wanted to establish this legitimate and true peace between the two factions. However, the Alliance still remembers the old Horde, so they're holding that standard, and they keep that association with the Burning Legion. So to differentiate his new Horde from his predecessor's Dark Legacy, Thrall kind of sanctioned Keldrin's campaign, against the Burning Blade. And then the Demon Infestation over in Desolus, which had such a grand display of hostility against the Burning Legion's agents. Keldrin and Thrall hoped that the Alliance would see that the new Horde's, sincerity, and, they wanted to prevent a war caused by misunderstandings. So he was quite the diplomat. And a lot of that comes to the thanks of being raised by humans. He got to see the inner working of not just their governments, but just the civility in general. Thrall ordered the Horde to prepare for the war and end Courage, right? He also sent a warlock named Felzarul to investigate strange happenings at the Temple of Altal Hakar, which, sunken temple. At some point in the past, Thrall tried to make contact with the Timbermaw tribe of Furbolg on behalf of the Horde, but as we covered in the last one, we know how that went out. They're not sentient enough to really have a society. They have clans and tribes, and sure, they have worship, but they're kind of on their own. So during the 25th year, this is the Burning Crusade era, if you will, Thrall entered negotiations with Kel'Thalas about joining the Horde. And he openly opposed the Blood Elves' methods, but recognized the Blood Knights' strategic value. Eventually, Thrall greeted the Blood Elven, adventurers that proved their people's value and were sent by Sylvanas Windrunner to Thrall in order to formalize Kel'Thalas into joining the Horde. A faction of Orcs does exist in Outland, who remained untouched by demonic corruption. The Orcs call themselves, one of my favorites, the Maghar. They are like this uncompromised of various Orcish clans who chose not to join McTheridan's legion of fell Orcs and appear to have been completely unaffected by the corruption wrought by Kil'jaeden. Thrall sent the Horde expedition to invade Outland in order to reconnect with the Maghar. Upon hearing the news of the expedition and finding them, Thrall immediately made plans to journey to Outland and make contact within the Maghar. Eitrigg urged Thrall to make proper preparation instead of leaving Orgrimmar and the rest of the Orcs in Azeroth with, kind of open to attack. So later on, Thrall decided Drekthar made a brief appearance in Outland, met his grandmother Gaia, and showed Garrosh Hellscream his father Grom, died a hero's death and ended the blood curse. During that meeting, though, the grandmother Gaia reveals Thrall's birth name. And that's the first time we learned that Thrall's birth name is Goel, son of Duratan, rightful chieftain of the Frostwolves. So Thrall arrives in Garradar to meet his grandmother. Great, she's Great Mother Gaia at that time. And now that being Garradar is right in the heart of Nagrand, and if you've ever been to Nagrand, at least Burning Crusade version, it is an absolutely gorgeous and untouched, flourishing plain of an area. After he returned home from Draenor, Thrall brought with him Garrosh, son of Gromosh Hellscream, to be his advisor. Later on, he retired the Gladiator and Master Rhaegar Earthfury, also became one of Thrall's advisors. So Rhaegar and Garrosh had a great discussion. While Garrosh, being your typical orc, wanted to destroy the Alliance, who he considers the Horde's enemies, and take Azeroth on for their own, which you see later on. I have a huge argument that Garrosh ran the Horde like a true orc. Okay, yeah, he got corrupted and blah, 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 all that stuff, sure. But Garrosh ran it with the mentality and the honor and the crush all, save all attitude that a true orc would. Rhaegar, on the other hand, wanted to remain open to diplomacy with the new alliance and kind of conserve their treaty on non-aggression with Theramore. Then suddenly Thrall received this call from Jaina to meet at Razor Hill. And at the meeting, Jaina told him that Varian had returned and narrated to Thrall the history of Varian's abduction. With Varian's return and willing attendance, Jaina wanted to schedule this other piece at the summit in Theramore Isles and hoped to easing tensions between the Horde Alliance, even though Thrall felt kind of uneasy about leaving Orgrimmar during this period, because the Orcs were feeling restless as it was. especially with his passive tolerance with the Alliance as it is. Thrall nonetheless agreed to attend the summit. When Thrall decided to go to a new meeting with the human king Varian, he brought with him his two advisors, Rhaegar and Garrosh, right, and some of the Corcoran. Rhaegar recommended that Thrall not bring Garrosh because, the Warchief thought it would be a good idea to help Garrosh rethink his attitude towards humans. Like maybe if he was put in front of them, he wouldn't have such a harsh idea of, set in stone, this is what they are, this is what they represent, they're evil, they're enemy, kill them. Hoping he would kind of warp that just a tad bit. So Thrall traveled by Zeppelin over to Theramore, where he had a peaceful discussion with an eye toward a mutual gain. The first talked of their past and discussed new resource problems, and like the Horde's war against the Night Elves for lumber, Varian offered to provide Thrall's people lumber in exchange for the Warchief offered copper and exotic hides in return. Varian had to end, the summit early as Goldshire and South Shore were reported to be under, simultaneous distress by the Scourge. Thrall and Varian were about to depart amicably, but upon exiting Theramore, the Twilight's Hammer called and invaded the city. The Alliance races of the Twilight Cultists attacked the Horde representatives, while the Horde races of the Twilight Occultists attacked the Alliance representative. So after catching a glimpse of Garona, Varian thought that Thrall had sent, her to assassinate him, as the Shadow Council had done in the past with his father. So after this time of battling, the Twilight's Hammer casualties began to rise a little bit. Then comes Medan. He entered to protect his mother, and in seeing this, the cultists kind of appointed their attention to kidnapping of Medan, while leaving Garona to die. Garrosh, of course, accused the Alliance of orchestrating the attack, while Varian accused the Horde, specifically Garrosh. Thrall tried to calm down over the heated parties and remain for them to be just kind of not jump to any conclusions. They don't know anything yet. Thrall tried to convince King Varian that Garona's unexpected assassination attempt was none of his people's, making yet Varian remain skeptical of his honor of the Orcs. Where then you have Rhaegar and Valera. Both of them were sure that neither Thrall or Varian would stoop to the assassination tactic on neutral ground, especially trying to rationalize the whole human-orc alliance was ruined. So this single-handed attack shook the delicate human-orc tolerances, leaving both factions in distrust of one another. Shortly after that, Thrall kind of departed back to his safety and home of Orgrimmar. Not that you can blame him. Thrall was later asked to join the new council of Tirisfal. I've never been able to pronounce this word. I used to say Tirisfal Glades. We'll call us Tirisfal Glades. Anyway, he refused to join this new council, but in his stead, had Rhaegar Earthfury do it. Thrall arrived to Orgrimmar, but the Lich King kind of executed his plan and made a zombie infestation. Because what's better than zombies at this point? This is very 2000. What was it? 2008. The Great Apothecary was able to find a cure for the Scourge's plague. And seeing this threat, Thrall met with Lady Sylvanas, Garrosh, Varrock Sourfang, and the Great Apothecary and Rhaegar in Orgrimmar to discuss what to do about the Scourge. Anybody who played the live event knows exactly how nasty it was, because I think they had to take the server down about a few of them, didn't they? After consulting with Sourfang and the spirits, Thrall favored the more, kind of cautious approach to dealing with the Scourge, and advanced scouting party to the frozen continent before committing the troops, as well as meeting Jaina Proudmoore to find out what the Alliance were planning to do with the Lich King. Garrosh, on the other hand, felt that dealing with the Alliance would not put the Horde in danger and wanted to take the Horde's armies and conquer the humans and then march to Northrend and crush the Scourge. Advocating that the Horde should rule all of Azeroth, Thrall, which was irritated by Garrosh's recklessness, he kind of had this bold challenge to his authority. He answered the humans like they weren't really a threat. But he wouldn't necessarily underestimate them, especially the Lich King, by walking blindly into a Scourge trap. In order to make an example of Garrosh's impudence, Thrall had to provoke Garrosh and challenge him to a duel by saying that he would not make the same mistakes as his father, Grom Hellscream. Frustrated, with his leader's apparent lack of ambition or the insults to his father, Gareth challenged Thrall to a duel in the Ring of Valor to settle the matter. The two orcs fought for some time, until it seemed Gareth had gained the upper hand. He began to taunt Thrall. But that battle, it was kind of interrupted by the Herald of the Lich King threatening Orgrimmar with destruction. And hearing this, Thrall used Chain Lightning and Garrosh, and both left the ring. So with Thrall telling the younger Hellstream they would settle the dispute later, the city was attacked by the countless abominations of Frostworms and a few Death Knights. Thrall and Garrosh led the forces of the Horde in repelling, the whole sort of thing. So, even though Death Knight's adventures freed from the Lich King, they will visit Thrall and Orgrimmar in order to be accepted into the Horde and give them a letter which Tyrion had asked Eitri to Northrend, and Thrall agreed to do. And that's right when we get to play Death Knights. So all of this is happening in real time. So if you're fleeing towards Northrend, right, Trag High Mountain avoided this cannon and tried to slip past the orcs. The corruption caused Trag to suffer from fits of violent thought, and he felt that he would even, kind of succumb to the power of the Lich King. Trag encountered Thrall, right, who appeared kind of aware of the presence through his shamanic magic, or shamanic, whatever you want to call it. And Thrall offered to help, but Trag kind of lost control of himself in the last two battled. Even after calming down, Trag warned him to kind of run before Trag lost control of himself again. Thrall outright refused to fight him, so no matter, abandoning the fight against the voice of the Lich King, Thrall told them that he had once feared becoming the animal Ados Blackmore thought him to be, falling into this bloodlust, this unescapable fear. But the truth of the matter is, and Thrall learned this, that bloodlust would kind of only have hidden as fear, leaving it eat away at him forever. But by bringing peace into his soul, possibly by facing the fear that he kind of accepted that's a pathbread of who he is, Thrall conquered his fear, survived, found his redemption, and if Thrall could do it, if Drom Hellstream could do it, so far Trag would be able to do it, as long as he allowed Thrall to help him. Trag decided that Thrall could do anything for him and warned him away at once. Thrall again refused and said that he would be struck down in accepting such a fate. He also asked that Trag look him in the eyes. As you do so, I know my executioner, he said to him, right? So Trag kind of prepared to kill Thrall, only to see that his eyes were, he does truly understand Trag's fear, a common misunderstanding that allowed Thrall to beat his own fear, and from which Trag now draws enough strength to deny the Lich King, and then kind of demands to kill him. Thrall offered him, he kind of offered him shelter and safety with orcs, but Trag turned it down, man. He knew better than Arthas that his fear would have turned him into a monster. The nearby shores of Durotar would be sailing north soon, and offered a small Frostwolf clan a mark, should the orcs need to contact. So if you go straight forward from there, you have the Wrath of the Lich King stuff. Trag kind of stowed away as one of the ships that reached Northrend, even though he was almost sure that they would fail, more so that he would die, but Trag was determined to meet his fate without fear. So then you have Broken Peace, and the combined, this combined Horde and Alliance force began on their assault against Angrathar, and at the Wrathgate, this uprising broke out within the Forsaken capital of Undercity. Vermathras and hordes of his demonic little brethren overran the city and slaying all those, but managed to escape with this number of loyalists, and they fled to Orgrimmar. Determined not to allow a Dreadlord foothold from Horde territory, Thrall and Sylvanas planned to an immediate counterattack. In the midst of their planning, Jaina arrived and bearing terrible news that in the wake of Bolvar Fourdragon's death, King Varian was preparing a possible war with the Horde. Jaina had been sent to elicit an explanation for the betrayal of the Wrathgate, though Thrall and Sylvanas explained that The Horde was not responsible for that whole Putris thing. Jaina had warned them the King Varian would most likely pursue retribution, and of course, he did. When Bran Bronzebeard learned of the old god Yogg-Saron, he kind of escaped in the prison of Aldor, and he hastily informed Ronan, who asked Jaina to summon Thrall and Varian to the Violet Citadel, which is an emergency council affair. Correctly guessing that the gravity of the situation, Thrall made haste to Dalaran with Garrosh. Upon arriving to the Violet Citadel, he was kind of intercepted by Jaina, who a desperate way to avoid a confrontation with my vegan who already asked, already within there. Thrall was unable to kind of stop the fight, but frightened, frustrated enough, Ronan succeeded in doing so. And he pleaded to all the room put aside their difference and work together through the common threat. Varian flatly refused, while Garrosh offered the opinion that Warchief would never really have a partnered up with cowards. Thrall expressed disappointment at Garrosh's actions. And then after the events in Dalaran, Thrall and Garrosh travel to the Warsong Hold, and where, on the way Garrosh kind of contemplates the pass, even where Thrall had bought Garrosh to Orgrimmar. After defending Warsong from an attack of the Scourge, Thrall witnesses a report even from the front. An Ice Crown about the Horde forces taking the Alliance during their broken front escapades. Thrall watches as Garrosh deals with the situation, telling the commander from Ice Crown that Sky Reaver crowned Blackstar. Corm? I think it's Corm. The Horde would fight with honor, and not fight at all. And Thrall was kind of watching Garrosh. He feels proud for him in his decision. If you bring it back to the Crusader Coliseum, Thrall accompanied, he was accompanied by Garrosh at that point, attended the Crusaders Coliseum at Ice Crown, and upon arrival, Tyrion greeted them personally. After this heated exchange, maybe two more escorted into the Coliseum with their host. Later, he and Garrosh observed the trials surrounding this congregation of the Horde's representatives. The whole Azeroth, the whole of Azeroth, really, was caught by the Emerald Nightmare, and so was the Warchief. His wolf companion Snowsong felt mists of the nightmare before it was too late. Orgrimmar, with his inhabitants, had already fallen to the mists, and after the threat of the Emerald Nightmare was over, Malfurion himself returned to Thura, to her Warchief, and told him of the sacrifice of the events. Thrall sent this letter of well wishes to Tyrande and the Archdruid. The bearer of the message was Thura. So Thrall also acted, as a nightmare in Thura's dreams, where he executed her for failing Thrall's nightmare. He was kind of forced to continuously relive the moment of his poor friend, Taretha Fox's death. Though he tried in alternate ways to save her life, she always ended up dying, no matter how many visions he went through. So Thrall attacked Durnhold with stealth and used Blackmore's own tactics. He reached the bedroom and found Taretha alive. Blackmore threw wine into Thrall's face, and while blinded, Thrall killed Taretha. The nightmare ended with Thrall crying in his sleep. Maul and Earthfury traveled to Orgrimmar to seek Thrall's counsel on the matter of the rising division between the Earthen Rings traditionalists and the Shatoa's advocates in the modern and effective methods in dealing with elementals. Thrall was kind of unsure on the matter and told Muln that change is the natural part of life, but it's only good if that right is for some people. He advised Muln, to follow the guidance of the spirits. Maul later relayed his fears with Drekthar about Thrall's indecisive stance. Drekthar told him that, it's his fault. It being with, advice to give Thrall what had been useless lately. Drekthar told Muln that lately he's been seeing two futures, and his visions had been less reliable for Thrall. Drekthar told Muln that a time will come when the Earthen Ring will become Azeroth's salvation, or lead it to ruin. The Farseer suddenly became frantic and warned Muln about the fire that consumes all. When Garrosh Hellscream kinda, found his soldiers, they finally returned home from Northrend. Thrall held a banquet in the young orcs' honor and presented them with Gorehowl, authorizing, that bonfires to be lit in Orgrimmar. Thrall held a speech about, of problems, about the turbulence of nature, also the financial problems that come with war. It was decided that Hamel Rune Totem would go to a meeting with the Cenarian Circle in order to get the help for the new horde. Now, it was impossible to trade with the Alliance's Night Elves due to estrangement, but unfortunately, Durotar had been suffering, a very severe drought because one of the bonfires came up as a conflagration that destroyed several buildings. Thrall himself tried to calm the flames, using the shamanic powers that he kind of had to fire was hell-bent on destruction, resolving the stuff out the flames forcibly, an act that he still regrets. He realized that something was very wrong with the elements, that they were kind of out of control. He kind of sat there and pondered the whole situation. There were these other troubles, such as an orc attack in the group of sentinels in the Ashenvale, where, with the incident at the Wrathgate, many orcs celebrated any attack. With the horde supplies almost depleted on the account of war with the Lich King and the usual droughts affecting Orgrimmar, many orcs viewed the Night Owl's exclusion from the horde. Thrall refused to turn over violators of any attackers he could find in the Alliance Justice. Thrall refuses to take over violators in his treaty. He kind of suspected, but didn't have proof, and they would also hurt, orc morale. But as soon as he refused to apologize for the thievery that Night Elf, for Night Elf goods, the murders, and the brutal methods in which they were kind of performed, though he did express anger with the treaty had been violated, but his unwillingness to publicly, kind of reprimand those who use these brutal methods to kind of assault Alliance members greatly weakened by popularity within the Alliance leaders themselves. After meeting with Proudmoore and Eitrig, naturally, Thrall decided that he was going to have this, travel to Nagrand and Outland and converse with the elements that were trying to rediscover why elements in Azeroth were so out of control. Before setting out on this quest, Thrall appointed Garrosh acting, as Warchief, and the Horde met with Cairn, who was against the decision, though Thrall was certain he did the right thing. Upon the arrival, they met his grandmother, who advised him to turn to the Mag'har against female Agra, the shamanic, instruction. Agra wasn't particularly fond of Thrall, and often made comments kind of shouting and, about and toward him, bordering on the snide. Sometimes she referred to him as slave, yet she dutifully took him over as a vision in the quest in Garadar in order, for him to make a truly connected with the spirits, a true shaman. So while in Nagrand, Thrall used a tailbuck, Shuxar, for travels. So Thrall eventually met with the elements in Draenor, the Fury as we call them. All of those except for the Fury of Earth were unable to help Thrall understand what was happening in Azeroth. The Fury Earth had felt on the other side was able to help him kind of ingest in a small rock. Thrall had brought with him from Azeroth. And the Fury told him that the elements were afraid of shattering. A cataclysm skin that was one they had broken for Draenor. Thrall prepared to, kind of return to Azeroth and attempt to prevent for the cataclysm, even though the spirits saw it coming. So Agra revealed that she had secretly been growing more and more attracted to him and wanted to go over to Azeroth, but only if he refused to be weak. Thrall welcomed his company, as he too kind of began to slowly grow close to her. And that was when Paris Stormhoof arrived in Garadar to tell Thrall that a transport had transpired in Azeroth. Now, about Cairn, Garrosh, and the Grim Totem attacks, these Thrall returned to Azeroth immediately, bringing Agra with him. So Agra's the new squeeze, but she's also a big link to where he's originally from. In attending his old friend's funeral and his bit of final farewell and to his companion, his heart was heavy. No, this was the last encounter with his most cherished friend. Consisted of this heart of harsh words. The former Warchief took him to the smallest place of peace, that of his old friend's rune spear, forever remember him by. The fragment that was etched into the single rune, whose meaning did not escape Thrall. It was healing. It was there that he put out the first armor, put off the first armor of Orgrim Doomhammer. Bane agreed to have it delivered to Orgrimmar. So he's slowly changing his way out of going from Skull Smasher to Tranquil. So not long after this, a massive earthquake hit, which caused this huge tsunami to hit Stormwind Harbor, a sinkhole to appear off the coast of Westfall, and the very ground to split underneath Thrall's feet. So Thrall decided to make his way towards the Maelstrom, which he senses was the center of the area of the cataclysmic event that was coming from typically, to attempt to calm the elements. Maelstrom on a ship means Draka's fury. Just saying. Yeah. Needless to say, we're getting there. A lot of people don't realize how long this character has actually been a part of everything we know and love so much. That being said, I just gave you guys a whole lot to unpack in just about 40 minutes. Like, we were nonstop going. So here's what we're going to try to do. Please don't quote me on it. I'm going to do my very best to do so. Tomorrow starts my RL work week, right? I'm going to try over the next couple of days to wrap up. We have about an hour left, maybe, of the rest of Orcs, the rest of Thrall's story. We're picking up right about at the Cataclysm, because that earthquake, which causes the Maelstrom to kind of go crazy, unlocks a few, what's the word? I'm not going to say it, but cataclysmic events, no pun intended. But what does it come down to? We just gotta see. It still goes on a long way. Picking up from the Cataclysm going forward. Now we're on Orcs. Orcs. Or Thrall's kind of slow down. He's getting older. He's got stuff he wants to do. He wants to, Agra obviously hits him in the right places. But we'll have to see. So hopefully either between tomorrow and Saturday, I will rip out another episode, because I really want to get Thrall's stuff out of the way. It's rich and it's expansive, but it is so dang much. If you can't think of anything, check the VOD, come back to it. It'll be here. I'm not taking it down. It's not going anywhere. But I wanted to thank everyone for dropping out. Sorry it took as long as it did. A lot of IRL stuff going on. Hopefully it'll be cleared up by next official episode next week, possibly over the weekend sometime. I'm going to try to start incorporating, now that things are starting to normalize in the realm not made of pixels, we're going to working on bringing some normalcy back. Hoping to expand the stream schedule, which we'll be posting on, of course, the Discord or the Twitter or Instagram or any of the socials that'll be put out there, and then just stick to it. I want to give this to roughly August, September, to see how far I can take it, and then we'll just go from there, man. I appreciate everyone for coming out. Anyone who sat in attendance, anyone who listened along, I appreciate you. And I'll catch you guys on the flip side. Peace.